And we are recording, and I want to welcome Rev Paul Johnson again, our quarter-time minister. Thank you so much for speaking with us as always. He's going to share with us Misfortunes which Never Materialize. Reverend Johnson, thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. And I want to say, first of all, I appreciate the good number of folks that came out yesterday for our gathering on Saturday under our solar array, which was a great time. Where I got to share about my favorite Unitarian Universalist in our history, James Freeman Clarke. And we'll be having another gathering next month, Saturday, February the 12th, and I'll be announcing more about that as time ensues. Misfortunes do, of course, happen in this life, and we know because they happen to us. And who among us this morning can claim that they have come thus far in life totally unscathed? But also it's true what Thomas Jefferson, a Unitarian, wrote to his fellow Unitarian, John Adams, after their estrangement had been bridged in 1816. And he said, he wrote, "How much pain has cost us the evils that have not happened." A half century later, Unitarian Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in his poem Borrowings, "Some of your hurts you have cured, and the sharpest you still have survived, but what torments of grief you endured from evils which never arrived." And then we have the words of Mark Twain, who was a Unitarian. Sometimes I wish he had been a Unitarian, but he said these words. He said, "I've suffered from a lot of things in my life, and most of them never happened." Isn't that too bad? What is this worry, this anxiety, which so often turns out to be completely worthless? And we know it's dangerous. It can suppress the immune system. It can lead to headaches and backaches. It can contribute to heart disease and stroke. Worry, someone said, is what makes the world go around and around and around and around. Anticipation and forethought that gets us moving and dealing with a problem, that's not worry. Worry is that round and round and round, that churning that leads nowhere. And who among us could say that we've never worried about family or job or the economy or our congregation or the possibility of war, and on and on and on? Well, why do we do it? Why do we worry? Why do we become overcome with anxiety? Well, first of all, of course, I think it's because we are wired for it in our brain. Daniel Gilbert, Harvard psychologist, in his wonderful book, national bestseller, Stumbling on Happiness, says that the greatest achievement of the human brain is the ability to imagine objects and episodes that do not exist in the realm of the real. And it is this ability that allows us to think about the future. As one philosopher noted, the human brain is an, quote, anticipation machine, quote, end quote, and making future is the most important thing it does. Now, Gilbert suggests, and who knows, maybe someday he'll be proved wrong, but he said that humans are the only animals able to do this to the amazing degree that we can do it. And that's due to the developed frontal lobe of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. Now, starting back in the 1930s, it was found that with the chemical or mechanical destruction of parts of the frontal lobe, anxiety and depression could be greatly reduced. And a lot of these lobotomies were performed. But the problem was that this led to a deficit in the ability of people who had undergone such a procedure to envision the future. They were locked into immediate space and time, caught in the permanent present. We know that this wonderful capability we have to think about the future can be pleasurable. We often daydream about the future. We tend to imagine ourselves achieving and succeeding rather than fumbling or failing often, at least I do. Indeed, thinking about the future can be so pleasurable sometimes we rather think about it than get there. Gilbert quotes one study where volunteers were told that they had won a free dinner at a fabulous French restaurant and were then asked when they would like to eat it. They could do it immediately, they could do it that evening, they could do it tomorrow. And most of the volunteers chose to put their restaurant visit off a bit, generally until the following week. Isn't that interesting? Thus, they had the pleasure of anticipation for a week in addition to the pleasure of the meal itself. And Gilbert claims that we sometimes like to frolic in the best of all imaginary tomorrows. And that can be a positive thing. A week before last, my wife and I went to Hilton Head, a common place where we can meet with our kids, Kristen and David and their partners. And the pleasure wasn't only those days together, but it was thinking about it and planning for it gave me so much pleasure. So I think as we look into the new year, it's good to have things we're looking forward to and that give us pleasure and anticipation. And also, of course, anxiety or worry about the future can have a positive aspect as well. If it leads us to take action to avoid future pain or even disaster. It was anxiety, of course, that prompted my wife and I to get up at 6 in the morning and start dialing to find a place to get the COVID vaccine. And I have to thank my wife, Carol, for her assiduous efforts to finally get us a place at Publix where we could get that done. And then, of course, we followed up with the boosters. But it was, of course, the anticipation of possibility of disease or death that was a motivating factor to us. So, and of course, so many of us want some control over our future. And that's a positive aspect of the prefrontal cortex. It's a remarkable human capability. But so often, anxiety and worry goes beyond the positive aspect of taking proper action to aching, debilitating, catastrophizing behavior. Why do we do that? Well, I think sometimes it's a learned response. We worry about things so often that of things that don't turn out badly that we begin to connect our worry with things turning out well. Do you think that's a possibility? I read that someone said that the more we worry and things turn out well, worrying helps. Suspect logic, to say the least. But then, of course, and I'll testify to this, it serves as an escape to keep me from dealing with something that I need to be dealing with. I remember back when I was writing my doctoral dissertation at Meadville Lombard at the University of Chicago, I could start to worry about, well, have I chosen the right topic? Can I really say something substantial and new about it? Or how am I going to ever defend this before the faculty? And if I would worry long enough, it was time to go to dinner. And I had escaped dealing with the problem and with the issue. Of course, the problem was it was waiting for me when I returned from dinner. Some say worry gives a sense of excitement to a humdrum life, maybe. Some say it's a means of boosting self-esteem. If I worry, I can consider myself a caring person. And worry is experienced concern. If I'm concerned about myself, I'm concerned about someone else, my family, we can wear that badge of being a concerned person. I've heard it even said that worry can lead to or exacerbate ulcers and heart attacks and backaches, and it's a means of self-pity and getting attention and sympathy from others. I don't know if that's the case, but some have said that it is. And some people, of course, have had a traumatic experience, which leaves them with post-traumatic stress that leads them to be more vigilant. I have a very good friend who served in Vietnam, and he's very vigilant as a result of that. He faced daily terrors of serving on a patrol boat going up and down rivers in Vietnam, where they would come under fire. His barracks was regularly shelled. One day he came back after one of his patrols and found that his whole barracks had been destroyed by a rocket while he was gone. He said his biggest concern was that his fellow soldiers had access to firearms while they were drunk. And he was worried about that. And so when he left the military, he was terribly vigilant. Even driving with him someplace, he would be worried, catastrophize about the possibility of an accident. So that's the reason, I think, for some people who've undergone a traumatic experience and are much more vigilant about possibilities of disaster. Well, what can we do about this if we have the periodic times or even chronic times of worry or anxiety? For 2 years, I was part of a group with Rabbi Edwin Friedman, the leading authority on relating family systems theory to congregational systems when I was in Silver Spring, Maryland. And that was a wonderful experience to be part of a group of union ministers and other professionals who met regularly to share our anxieties and worries about our congregation or our organization. And his whole point, of course, in having such a group was to share with us his belief that ministers in particular should be a non-anxious presence within a congregation. And so congregations are very often anxious about something, incipient or full-blown conflict. The question, can we stay afloat financially? Are we going to be embarrassed in some way as a congregation? There's so often is anxiety. And he said, you have to provide a vision and a presence which dispels that anxiety. And so we would say to Ed, well, how do we do this? And of course, his standard means was, guard against triangulation within the congregation and the staff, and beware of secrets in the congregation. All these lead to anxiety. Well, what else? What else, Ed, should we do to deal with anxiety personally or in the congregation? And he said, that's just the question, isn't it? How do we deal with it? That's just the question. How do we deal with it? And he would throw the question back upon us. Isn't that interesting? Well, I'm not going to be an Ed today. I'm going to give you some ideas. And in our time of sharing afterwards, you may share some ideas with me as well. But the first one is when you're feeling overwhelmed by anxiety or worry, to flee the scene. So often I awake in the morning and I've been dealing with something that has been causing me anxiety. Doesn't make sense for me to just sit in bed and have that gnaw on me and around and around and around. To get up and read or watch television or go for a walk or go for my swim, but don't let worry get its tentacles into me. I remember the late Wayne Dyer tells a story of a client who had trouble with worry, particularly in his job, and he went off with his family to take some time off from his worries, and he was going to go off for an afternoon of recreation. But before doing so, he said, I'm going to go take a shower in sauna. So he went into the sauna, and there was a fellow there who was consumed with worry. He wasn't able to take a vacation from his worries. Yeah, among other things, he was telling about the imminent collapse of the stock market. And so Dyer's client, due to Dyer's teaching, got out of there as soon as he could. And he played a spirited game of table tennis with someone, and he played some tennis with his wife. And then he had a game of touch football with some young people. And then, delightfully exhausted, he returned to the sauna, and there was his friend, still stewing away in the sauna, still worrying. Dyer's client had spent moments excitedly alive. This fellow had been still consumed by his worries. Allied to this is a technique called EPR, which means examine your worries, then to see if it's a real threat or problem, and then establish a plan to deal with it, and then do your plan of remediation. And Paul Huck, a psychologist, tells about a business client who was sued for an amount of money beyond his insurance coverage. And Huck said, well, go to a lawyer to see if there's any basis for this suit. And he went to the lawyer and learned that there was a basis, and that he could defend about it. And he followed the EPR, but he still was anxious. And so he said, well, juggle numbers in your head, go to a movie, read a book. It's difficult to keep your mind on two things at once. And the client became quite adept at this, and it did help him until he was able to get through his problem, his legal problem. In 2010, Daniel Gilbert, who I quoted earlier, the psychologist from Harvard, and Matthew Killingsworth developed a smartphone app that periodically asked a group of 2,250 volunteers what they were doing, whether they were thinking about what they were doing and how they felt at that moment. And the survey concluded that we spend nearly 47% of our waking hours thinking about something other than the task at hand. And when our mind wanders, it's usually not to a happy place. Unlike other species, the psychologists concluded humans spend a great deal of time thinking about things that happened in the past, could happen in the future, or might never happen at all. And so the whole suggestion here is to bring your attention to the present moment, to the present mindful moment by giving attention, for instance, to your breath. And I'm pleased with the quotes we've had today by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I remember from one of his books, he relates how when he was a novice monk in Vietnam back in the 1940s, he was often given the unenviable job of standing at the kitchen on a cold winter's day, cleaning dishes for 100 other monks. And this was particularly laborious because there was no hot water, only freezing hot water, and there was no detergent. He had to use ashes, of all things, and husks of rice. And he said since then, in recent days, the monastery is modernized with hot running water and soap and scourers. And so the monks are able to do the job much more easily and then relax with a cup of coffee or tea rather, to reward themselves afterwards. But I found after he related this in his book that he was not particularly happy about these modern upgrades. He said that doing dishes simply because you want them to be clean is the wrong way of approaching the task. And the right way is to wash up dishes, is to do it purely for the sake of doing it, of the task itself. If we hurry through the dishes for a cup of tea, like a boring chore to be endured, with our minds already looking ahead to that tea, when we're finished, then we cannot possibly be cleaning the dishes for the sake of cleaning them. Moreover, we cannot be fully alive while undertaking this task. It's impossible for us, if we stand in front of the sink wishing away the time, to appreciate the wonder that is life. That's because we're neither conscious nor mindful of our bodies, our movements, our thoughts that we're experiencing in the precious moment as we are doing the dishes. I think that's an interesting issue that to contemplate. And I've often done that. Sometimes I take a regular walk in the morning, and you have a beautiful place to take these walks, and where we live around some lakes and so forth. And I can get so caught up in what I have to do that day or a particular problem or difficulty that I'm not enjoying that walk. And I take his example and I take his suggestion of centering my attention on my breath for a while, the in and out, which brings me back into the moment so I can enjoy that walk in a much better way. But this whole idea of taking action comes to me so forcefully when I think of my greatest worry in the 70s and 80s was the possibility of nuclear war, which really was a damper on my enthusiasm for so many days. I could get into a real funk about this, and I saw no way out of it. And it really was a damper on my life. And then I said, well, I'm going to see what I can do in terms of action. So I remember I got involved with the Freeze movement in my local community. I lobbied on Capitol Hill with the UU Office of Social Concerns. I took part in some demonstrations, and I was chosen from among many you used to be part of an audience with some of the White House, at the White House with some of Reagan's top officials on his buildup of the nuclear force and what it was all about. And I have to admit, I was more surprised than possible at the reduction of nuclear tensions that Reagan and Gorbachev were able to bring about, and that we actually started to, to reduce the nuclear stockpile. Of course, we were told by the Reagan White House folks that this was the idea. If we really showed the Russians that there was no hope for them to match our buildup, this would happen. And of course, it actually did. Now, some say, what is the real reason this all happened? I don't know. But I will say that my funk of total worry, anxiety was lifted when I took some action and was involved in something to do something about it. I think it's important to talk about your worries with someone important to you, not someone who's going to jack up your anxiety even more and up the voltage. Boy, you sure should worry about that. I'm worrying about that too. Isn't it terrible? You don't want that type of thing. But someone that can help you get a realistic handle on what you're dealing with. My greatest feeling and experience of mutual support was when I was a part of a ministerial support group in Silver Spring, Maryland, when I was there for about 10 years, where we'd meet once a month. We'd do a go around, and we'd review for everyone our past month. We'd have lunch together, and then someone could take up a particular issue that they were dealing with, they were concerned about, and everyone would speak out of their experience and be supportive. And that was such a wonderful and helpful aspect for me in what was still a formative time in my ministry. And of course, our small group ministry within the congregations I've served, I understand that you've had such a group in the past in this congregation, helps to give us fresh perspectives. And even just coming together with others gets us out of a feeling of anxiety and possible hopelessness. I'm so impressed with the study that was done by David Spiegel, professor of psychiatry at Stanford University a number of years ago. And his study has been replicated other times, but he took a group of women suffering from end-stage metastatic breast cancer. Of course, that's one of the most anxiety-producing things you can imagine. The control groups were not part of a support group, but those in the experimental group were in a support group that met regularly, meeting to discuss fears, anxieties, and their life situation. And the groups that met regularly lived twice as long as those in the control group. Isn't that an amazing statistic? Meditation, centering your attention, getting support, they've all been helpful to me. And of course, then at times of real worry and extreme and perhaps panic attacks and so forth, to get psychotherapeutic help, perhaps medication from a trained listener is an important step to take as well. The important thing is to act, to do, and not to stew. So I encourage all of us this year to realize that there is something we can do, that we don't have to be overtaken and overrun by misfortunes which never materialize, and even to deal creatively with those that do. That's a great time to do it at the beginning of a new year. So look at your worries or anxieties, maybe even make a list of them. Maybe think about the things you're worried about this past year. And you may find that obsession or worry did no good whatsoever for those few misfortunes which may have occurred. Perhaps there's a better way than what you've experienced in the past. Perhaps there are resources available for a less worrisome new year. And if this is not a problem for you, hooray! Pat yourself on the back and be willing to help others as well. So may it be for all of us in the coming year. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.